Howdy, all you delicious people. I am here today to review Dreamscape. So, have you ever wanted to go into someone's dreams, but you forgot your ESP at home? Well, that is basically what this movie is about. Immediately, a lot of people will probably come into this movie and say, yeah, this is pretty much Inception. And I say yes, and I say no. Inception is kind of much more of a heist movie where it's like, hey, we need the combination of the safe and we got to go into this guy's mind to get and do that. Whereas Dreamscape tries to help people that are having like huge amount of night terrors or problems sleeping, to where an ESP like person with this mind ability is to go in and try to help this person conquer something so they no longer have this horrifying dream hanging over them. Because it kind of gets to the point to where this dream is ruining this person's life and like kind of like destroying their day-to-day activities. Like there's some people that are probably just like while they're working just repetitively just dozing off and falling asleep just because they've continued to avoid going to sleep. So I actually really did enjoy like the bits and pieces that we go into in this film. There is quite a bit of times where we are to have either Dennis Quaid's character Alex, who is either helping out like a little kid, or he's having to also help out bizarrely the president of the United States because because there's a reason to. Uh, like going into this movie, there is some kind of goofy things about this film. But overall, like I just kind of also like this film. Like there's something that I would say that this movie has like a huge amount of potential is if they were to like do this in like current day film, like it would be very interesting to see what exactly they do with this if they were to ever remake or reboot this. Plus, but a lot of people would probably say, but Inception exists. Yeah, Inception does exist, but like Inception doesn't do things like this. A lot of people will probably say if they do a remake of Dreamscape, it'll be like, oh well, it like they'll probably make it seem much more like Inception than it actually was originally, and because basically that's the famous dream movie, like going into like a person's mind repetitiously and so on and so forth. But yeah, so I actually like this movie. Like it's so what is to kind of go on here? So we have to kind of wrangle Alex's character in and have him go and work for Dr. Paul Nathotny. I'm Paul. Let's just say Dr. Paul. So, because evidently Alex had worked with Paul in the past, and so Dr. Paul is going to make it a offer that he can't refuse for Alex to go in and do this whole dreamscape experience. Eventually, Alex is starting to see some other ESP members that are either to fail inconsistently their attempts, or you'll even see some people die during these things. And so, yeah, like it's kind of like there's a lot of stakes at hand for a dream thing. But yeah, so like if anything, this almost kind of like goes down as like the Matrix, where like you die in the Matrix, you die for real because the brain and everything like that. But like it kind of gets goofy to where it's like, okay, so if you die, like if you die in your dream, you die for real. Like, is it like Stay Alive? You die in the game, you die for real, I guess. But anyways, because I guess if you have this ESP connection, that makes something even much more like reality connected. So I guess your brain just like has to really and truly process it and basically just go out of its way to kill you off, I guess. I don't know why. It's weird. I guess the whole ESP of things just kind of makes things much more real than it actually is. But, anyways, yeah, so kind of just teeing it up, like that's the easiest explanation of this movie. Go out of your way to watch this on several different kind of apps. Currently, it's on Tubi right now, from what I've seen. I saw this on HBO Max, but I think you can dare, in fact, watch this in any number of different apps. But Tubi is the easiest one because it's absolutely free. You can just, if you've never been on Tubi before, you can go and see this movie and a number of things without any kind of fees. HBO Max does have certain fees, but reasonably. There's also just a ton of content that eventually will go on there at some point. But, anyways, I think it's that also coveted time for me to go into spoilers about this film. I actually liked it. Like some people might just be like, "Yeah, there wasn't enough there," or maybe some people might decide this to be a goofy movie. Also, I thought there were some cool effects going into this movie because it's like a nightmare film. So eventually, something will be out there to get somebody. Eventually, in one dream sequence, there is a monster in the dream. So, like, that kind of seems fun and that kind of seems cool. But with that said, I think it is now spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we get to spoil this movie. So, as per usual, very beginning of the film, we have this Dr. Paul that is to want Alex Gardner because it seems that he has had a high level of ESP experience compared to a lot of people. But the thing of it is that Alex had gone away from this project and gone on his own. Kind of went dark, and he has just been ever since been going to the horse races and betting on horses that he knows is going to win because he has this like psychic ability to know when horses are going to win because ESP, but also just the ability to psychically know things. So Alex is to also seemingly go into the minds of women and control them to be able to consistently get them as uh let me pause here for a second. Okay. So Dr. Paul is to want Alex, and so Alex is to go on and really try to evade Dr. Paul and really go and eventually know when somebody could quite possibly be after him. So Paul is, or Alex is trying to skirt away, but he cannot skirt away for long. Eventually, he is to eventually get wrangled into this whole science experiment, and so Alex eventually is to go his way to go into this environment and eventually head right into the laboratory where Dr. Paul is working with some candidates, one ESP guy and one person that is having horrible nightmares. So Dr. Paul is to say to Alex once they re-meet up, it's like, hey, like you're a little late. Like I kind of expected you much sooner. Like already knowing that Alex was going to know that they were going to try to bring him in. And so Dr. Paul now has to kind of give this offer to Alex, which he can't really refuse. So both Dr. Paul and Alex go out to this bar, and Dr. Paul is to explain everything and like explain what they're doing and like what they're going on doing now. So while they're doing that, it seems that there is a guy named Charlie Prince who is kind of watching over these two people. talk about what they are doing, but he can't exactly hear everything. So, because he's at a far distance, like he's just kind of feeling things out to see, like, okay, this must be their new guy. So Alex is not really interested in being basically a science lab rat, and Alex is just kind of very hesitant on wanting to do this thing all over again. If anything, he's doing experiments where they're like asking him to guess a color, and of course he guesses it correctly, but then a lot of times he just guesses it incorrectly, and then uh, the girl that he's with, who is Jane, is to mention it's like, well, you're not focusing. Like, you need to focus. And so, since Alex is kind of working his mind power, he's like, yes. And Jane is like, what? And Alex goes, yes, I find you attractive. Because evidently she had the thought of that. And she's like, hey, don't go into my mind. And Alex is like, well, you told me to work my mind power, so I'm working it. Plus, really, Alex, that's all he ever does, is he just tries to, like, seduce a woman through her brain, and, like, I guess that's an easy life for him to go into. But anyways, so Alex is just very disinterested in being a lab rat, and so like eventually he's like, well, yeah, like this is a nice place to sleep for a little bit, but I'm gonna get the heck out of here. So Alex is to kind of like refuse wanting to be a part of this project, but eventually Dr. Paul is like, well, like, you know what, that is too bad. Well, like, I guess if anything, you'll probably be seeing the IRS here pretty soon. And Alex is like, for what? And Dr. Paul is to mention, like, well, the IRS is going to be doing an audit on you for the last 5 years because really the whole gambling thing kind of was alerted to the IRS, and they're probably going to seize any number of things. But Dr. Paul can make that all go away if Alex is to be a part of this project. And so Alex ends up being very much blackmailed into this project. Like, he basically has to do it whether he wants to or not. So, and Dr. Paul is working with Bob Blair. Bob Blair seems to be the guy that's kind of funding this thing and also doing some projects that Dr. Paul may not be aware of. So, Alex is to go into kind of prepping his brain eventually to go into one person's dream of this construction worker, and Alex is immediately thinking like, oh my god, like if I'm going to go into this guy's mind, I'm probably going to end up in a beer commercial. And so they are to go into this dream, and Alex and this construction worker are on this beam together. And evidently, this construction worker has this dream that he is consistently falling. And he's just holding on to this beam. So Alex is holding on to this construction worker and trying to hold on to him tightly. And all of a sudden, this guy's shirt is starting to rip. All of a sudden, it seems that even Alex is starting to slip a little and fall. And so Alex does fall, and before he hits the pavement, he is to be woken up, and they're just like, well, like, if anything, that was a good trial run, but like eventually we're gonna have to like kind of like, you're a little rusty, Alex. We gotta get you like prepared. We gotta get you set up. We gotta like, you really gotta like work on this. You're really rusty. So Alex is to eventually see that there was a kid in the very first time that he went in there that has this horrible nightmare that this ESP guy cannot cure. He cannot fix. So it seems that Alex starts hanging out with this kid, and like starts to really become his friend, and kind of asks him like, "Hey, buddy, like, what are you here for?" And so it seems that this kid has a nightmare every night about a monster in his dreams, and so Alex is like, "Well, hey, like that sounds like that sounds sad. Like, if anything, like." Alex eventually is to bargain with uh, Dr. Paul and say, hey, like, you know what? If you're going to have me be here, like, I want to pick where I want to go next. And if I'm going to pick, I want this little kid. I want to make his problems go away. So I will do this kid's dreams. So Dr. Paul is like, okay, well, if you're adamant about doing it and there's no way to persuade you otherwise, because it seems that Alex just kind of just takes over this thing and he's like, dude, I'm going to be calling the shots. Like, everything I'm going to do, it's going to happen. So Alex is to go and be conjoint or dream conjoint with this kid. And before Alex is to go in, Dr. Paul is to tell him, well, you need to have this kid on his own conquer this fear, or he will never let this go. So Alex is like, okay, we'll figure that out. So Alex and this kid are to eventually go into this dream. And so, like, Alex is kind of very confused or not really understanding exactly what's going on. And so this kid is in this dream and he's in his house. And this snake creature is going in and trying to attack this kid every single time. And it seems that also when this kid is to call out for his father, eventually the snake man goes out and eventually goes and completely kills this kid's father. So after the snake man does that, he comes back for the kid to try to kill him every single night. So, like, we have Alex who tries to like combat this thing, but we find out also Alex is also terrified of this thing. And so like both Alex and this kid are trying to like having to like forcibly come at this thing. And so eventually Alex tries to fight this thing and eventually he gets kind of knocked out, to where eventually the kid is to see an opening to go and kill this snake, and so that ends the dream. That has this kid be like he's conquered his fear and now will never come up again, which is great. So Alex is to eventually wake up from the dream, and like Dr. Paul's like, yeah, he did it. Like, he freaking did it. No one else could do it, but he figured out some way to just do this. So good for him. So pushing on to the next candidate, it seems like there is some guy that is to kind of like not really be honest about what is going on within his dreams, but it seems like he is having a horrible time sleeping as well. And this guy who is Mr. Weber is doing this whole like he's doing this whole thing with his wife present. And so this guy is not really being all honest about what is really going on in his dreams, but it seems that Mr. Weber is having problems sleeping. So Alex is like, well, okay, let me give this a shot. Let me see if I can like just kind of figure out how to like figure out this guy. So Alex goes into Mr. Weber's dream, and we find out that both Mr. Weber and Alex are kind of like driving into this dream and eventually walking into Mr. Weber's home to eventually find out that this dream is all about Mr. Weber walking in on his wife and his, I think, family member of his having an affair. But then all of a sudden, every single friend of Mr. Weber's comes out of the woodwork to see this entire affair. Like the neighborhood priest, the neighbors from down the street, the like every single member of seemingly Mr. Weber's family. Like everybody that Mr. Weber knows is eventually noticing that this whole entire like affair is going on, and they're basically shaming Mr. Weber for having this happen to him or just heckling him or whatever. And so Alex is to come out of this dream and just be like, yeah, like Dr. Paul, I'm going to tell you what happened, and then you're going to have to just treat this guy. Because evidently he lied while his wife was in the room about what his dream actually was about. So, if anything, really, Dr. Paul is like, well, yeah, there's gonna be an easy way to treat this guy. So if anything, we'll easily get this squared away. But Alex doesn't actually take care of that. He like someone else just does. So So eventually we start to see that there is another ESP member that has psychic power that is to kind of almost being like a rival to Alex. Because we have this guy who is named Tommy who is to come into Alex's room while he's showering and start to play his saxophone. Awful, I might add, because we hear the squeaks and squawks of this saxophone and it sounds awful. Like, I was just waiting for this guy after he squeaks all the way through. He's like, never had a lesson. Like, I was expecting that kind of joke. But a lot of people will probably remember Tommy from the movie Warriors, or like he's played a lot of villains. Like, he was in like the remake of The Longest Yard, and he's often played a lot of villains in a lot of movies. But anyways, so Tommy is like kind of mentioning how like, oh well, like Alex, you think you're like the cock of the walk or whatever. Like, well, like this town is is quite big enough for one other big shot to come into it, and now I'm here. So like I'm paraphrasing like what exactly had gone on between the two, but like Tommy is kind of cementing how much of a hot shot he is, and Alex is like, well, great, like I don't care. Like I'm kind of forced to be here, so I don't care what kind of accolades that this guy has. So Tommy goes on, and he is to perform other kind of things as well as Alex. So we start to see Tommy start to perform these dream connections, and then eventually Tommy is to be tying himself to one old lady, and we have Tommy that is with this old lady, and she is to die during her dream. She is to, I guess, have a heart attack and die. And so Tommy is very much shaken up by that, and so Tommy is to kind of be beside himself. Like when like people start coming to him, like Alex, and start like asking him things, Tommy wants nothing of Alex because he's like, dude, I'm shaken up. Like, I need some time alone. I don't want you here. So Alex is to eventually bump into Charlie Prince, and this guy is to let Alex know what is going on with the guy who is to be pulling the strings here, which is Bob Blair. Charlie Prince is to mention that that really there are ESP guys that are going to be sleeper assassins. And so Bob Blair is going and trying to fund a sleeper assassin thing. And so Alex could be caught in the crossfire of all this when eventually this is to start to pop off. And Charlie Prince is also mentioning that they are trying to wrangle the president in to try to get him assassinated. So that's like their biggest selling thing, is to say, like, dude, we killed a president. Like, if anything, like, that was us. We did that. So just so that way they can sell it to everyone. So, because the president is having these horrible nightmares about uh, pulling the ripcord on America, basically going and pushing the nuclear bomb and destroying the world. Like in the very early part of this movie, we have an old man who is the president, who is to see his wife just bizarrely running in place because it feels obvious she's running in place with a background scene behind her. And we find out that the president had his wife die, and so like the president is having these awful dreams. So it seems that these dreams are so awful that Bob Blair is like, well, great, like let's reel him in, like let's go ahead and just kill him in his dream. And so Charlie Prince is trying to get Alex a heads up about this, because evidently even though you have fly capabilities, I guess it's not to really see who the bad guy is out of all this. So I guess you can only pick horse numbers, but anything else. So Alex and Charlie Prince are to eventually make their way through this like parade through this school that is to come in. Maybe it's homecoming or maybe it's some other reason. But both Alex and Charlie are to get separated, and Charlie is to get assassinated. And so that causes Alex to run like heck, because he is trying to get away from any of these people that are going to kill him, and then really just also like they kind of want Alex out of the way anyways, because Alex is probably going to be the only one that is going to stop the presidential assassination attempt. And so really Alex is going to have to just run away, and eventually steal a motorcycle to make his way back to the horse track to have some of his friends kind of delay some of these guys, because Alex is going to have to forcibly make it back to this spot that the president is at, so Alex can get into the president's mind before Tommy gets into the president's mind. And so it's going to be like, who can stop the president from either living or dying. So because Jane is to help them out, or help Alex out. So she's gonna like leave a door unlocked so he can get in there. So Alex is to go in a room underneath the president and just like connect into his brain, because Alex is to eventually, once he's starting to dust off some of the rust, he eventually goes into Jane's house one night and tries to see if he can connect with her in her dream to have this romantic dream with one another. And Alex could. They both wake up, and Jane is like, oh my god, like, you got into my mind and you manipulated it. And Alex is like, well, you know that we both wanted that. And Alex is like, and Jane is like, well, yeah, but still, like, you still manipulated my brain. And so Alex is like trying to help Jane understand, but wait a minute, like think about it. Like I connected with your brain without a device hooked up to me. Like so like this is basically telling that I'm primed to be able to do anything now. Like basically they kind of do this kind of thing so that way you can understand where this movie's heading towards the end of the film. So Alex is to be uh, on the floor underneath the president, so that way he can go and he can connect to the president's dream and basically just fall asleep. So the president is on this train of this nuclear apocalypse. Like it kind of looks like the original Total Recall, where every part of this Earth is bizarrely like it has orange skies. I'm like, okay, like I guess to try to make it look much more like of a horror scene or creepy. So Alex is to make it to the president first and explain everything to him in his dream, and like the president is just like, oh, okay, like so like Alex is desperately trying to tell the president to wake up, but the president's like, well, I took a sedative, and so I'm not going to easily get woken back up. And so Alex is like, well, then plan B is we're going to have to just save your life until this whole thing wears off. So, in this dream. So, Tommy is to pop in on the stream and just be like, well, yeah, like, guess what? I'm here. And it seems that Tommy is much more experienced in a dream than Alex is. And eventually we are to start to see that eventually Tommy is to have some dialogue with Alex and try to uh, have Tommy showcase his ability when some conductor approaches Tommy. Tommy goes and grows nails onto his hand and rips out this guy's heart and like shows it to Alex, like flings it at him, and to just kind of show what Tommy's real true skill is here. So both Alex and the president are to just kind of like get set for whatever Tommy is going to uh, bring them. And so all of a sudden, the entire room that they are in shifts. It shifts to all of a sudden have a entire like still train uh, car that they're in, but all of a sudden, all this room is kind of filled with zombies. And eventually, Tommy is to look somewhat like a zombie. And so, Tommy is telling all the other zombies that the president had caused them to be this way. So, Tommy is pointing to the president to have all these zombies go and get him. The president and Alex try to run off to the next car, close the door on these zombies, and lock it. And these zombies try to crash through the window of this door, but they can't get out. They can't get to either the president or Alex. So Tommy is to arrive on the next car because brain magic. So Tommy is to mention that he saw Enter the Dragon like a number of times, and that all of a sudden he has Bruce Lee dream skills. That all of a sudden he is to have this like weird looking futuristic nunchuck that is like silver and has these like spikes at the end of it, and it looks like this like nunchuck also has like a laser light thing coming from it. It looks really cool, but like the ends of it just looks really cheesy. So Tommy starts doing this like nunchuck thing, and I'm like, wow, like this is really getting cool. Like this looks pretty sweet. And so, of course, now Alex has to fight Tommy and kind of disarms him with the whole nunchuck thing and tries to take him out, tries to beat him and hurt him. But Tommy is to realize the one weakness that Alex is to have, his nightmare that he was to have, because Alex was to draw the Snake Man from the kid's dream before, and Tommy was to notice that Alex was drawing that, and Tommy's like, "Hey, what are you drawing there?" And Alex mentions is like, "Well, yeah, like something from this kid, kid's dream. It really haunted me," and so Tommy is to recreate this Snake Man in this sequence, and so it really pushed on Alex and the president to try to get away from this train to go into this swamp-ish land where they are to be chased by these dogs that eventually get electrified, while both Alex and the president were making their way through these wires. These dogs accidentally get electrified, and so both Alex and the president start to make their way through this swamp looking toxic land. Tommy is to eventually jump out as the Snake Man, and Alex and the president are to avoid that. And so they continue to go on and on. And so the Snake Man is to eventually take down Alex and go after the president, but then Alex is to come back as Tommy's father. Because what happens is that Alex tries to fight off the Snake Man with a tire iron and a torch, and that just leads Snake Man to bite Alex in the shoulder, which technically does nothing. And so Snake Man goes off to try to get to the president. So Alex goes back as Tommy's father. I guess the one thing that would just stop Tommy in his tracks, because Tommy, I guess, had killed his father, and so Alex is using that against Tommy. Tommy's only real true weakness. While Alex is doing that, appearing as Tommy's father, the president goes and stabs Tommy in the back, killing him. So Bob Blair is watching on as Tommy is doing all of what he's doing, and Blair is to watch as Tommy is dying in his sleep. So after that, both the president and Alex is to wake up after this, just to be like, "Hey, we did it. This is good." So, so there isn't any real true proof that they can come up with, because it's a dream, that Bob had been any part of what had transpired. The president tried to get to Bob and say, "I know you did this. Alex had told me that you guys had put this together," and Bob's like, "Well, nothing's ever going to come with that because it's a dream." You have no proof. So the president's hands are technically tied, but eventually the president goes and finds Alex making his way out of this facility, and the president is desperate to stop and just say, "Hey, thank you for helping me in my dream." And Alex is like, "Well, yeah, I'm just glad that both of us had gotten out of there alive." Really saying that Alex is like, "Well, yeah, I was really and truly there. I was trying to help you out. Good thing it worked." So hopefully that made it to where the president no longer has that kind of dream again. Plus also, the president himself did conquer that dream, so I'm assuming that he should probably not have that kind of dream anymore if he conquered his fears. So yeah, so maybe everything is going to be okay after that. And because the president was talking to one of his to one of his men and mentioning like, well, hey, maybe he's going to go and make some offers to some other countries to like try to make this whole nuclear crisis like bargain with them in some bizarrish manner that people are like almost second guessing or questioning. It's like that doesn't seem right. Like it seems like the president is so much in fear of nuclear war that he's desperately just like doing anything to try to avoid it. Even the point of like bargaining and begging with other countries, that just seems like a no, like shouldn't do that. But so with that, the president is saying like, yeah, there's nothing that I can do about Bob Blair, and Alex is like, well, how about I just handle that? I think I have something in mind. So Bob is to go into his office and go into this elevator, and then all of a sudden, poof, Alex is to show up. And Bob is like, how did you get in here? And Alex is just like, well, I have all kinds of tricks. So Alex is to all of a sudden rip off his face to show that he is some kind of snake man and that he is going to tear Bob limb from limb in his dream in a horrible like fashion. And so Bob's wife is to wake up, hit the alarm clock, and try to wake her husband, and she can't, eventually realizing that Bob had died in his sleep, sadly enough. So we end this movie with both um, Alex and Jane going off on some train ride uh, because at some point there might be some people quite possibly after Alex because of his abilities. And so he has to go and sneak away to have a permanent hiatus to have this no longer be a thing where he's going to be found and used against his will. So, uh, with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.